Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. Now we've looked for a few weeks at the spies that Joshua sent in. Remember the time before, 40 years prior, Joshua, Caleb, and 10 other spies went in to spy out the land. And of course, 10 of them came back with a negative report. Joshua and Caleb came back with a positive report. And Israel grumbled and complained and got afraid, and God sent them back out into the wilderness for 40 years. Now Joshua sends 2. He doesn't need to send 12, he sends 2. And he sends them to Jericho. And God had providentially lined things up for them to meet up with Rahab. And Rahab actually protected them, kept them safe, hid them, and then sent them in a different direction than the pursuers, they called them. So Rahab now has made a contract with the 2 spies that whoever's in her house would be safe when she hung that scarlet thread up in the window. And they would look for that, and anybody in that household would be safe. So we leave the spies going back to Joshua and giving their report. And look what their report is this time. It says, "And they said unto Joshua," chapter 2, the last verse, "Truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land. For even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us." So what does that tell you God's doing on the hearts of the occupants of Canaan? He's putting fear into their hearts. They've heard how Pharaoh's army was defeated in the wilderness. They've heard how they've been successful in every campaign that they've participated in. Remember, the 2 kings on that side of Jordan had opposed them, one of them being a giant named Og. Remember him? And they defeated them soundly. And the news of that has scattered throughout all the land, and they're all scared. And you see Ahab giving that report of how they had heard this. And we see, look at verse number 11 of chapter 2. It says, "And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath." See, she knew a little bit about God when she spoke then. But notice this. She's telling them, hey, we know you're coming, and everybody's scared. So the spies go back and report faithfully to Joshua. And notice in chapter 3 now, verse 1, it says, "And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim, and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over." All right, so they moved locations. Now they're right next to the Jordan. Okay? Now remember, they had been in preparation for this event for 40 plus years now. Remember, they went out into the wilderness. You can look at that 2 ways. That for 40 years, they can look at that as a divine judgment on the adult generation who had lent themselves to unbelief and fear rather than going in and conquering at the time when they could have gone in. So that was a cleansing out of that generation, save Joshua and Caleb. The only 2 left of that generation. But the other way that you can look at is that it was a training for the next generation. Because now remember, that generation would have passed away, so what would that next generation have to learn how to do? Everything. They'd have to learn how to fight. They'd have to learn how to march and all those things. They'd have to learn about the Lord. They had to learn everything from Joshua and from the priests. And they had to be schooled, instructed, and trained by the generals and all those in warfare that would have to be trained on how to fight and how to serve the Lord. So not only was it a judgment time, but it was also a training time for those that were still alive, those that were the younger, the next generation, I should say. So we could call it a training period. Right, now you think about wandering around in the desert for 20 years or 40 years, that's a long time, ain't it? A long time. 40 years is a long time, isn't it? And going from one place to another, I think I've got a map up here that shows the routes. Look on the map here, all these red marks. That was the journey from Egypt all the way around here and all the way around here and back to the Jordan. You think about that, that's a lot of walking in it. And this is mostly wilderness. So it's a lot of toughness there. Remember, a lot of the people would have died and are dying on the way. Like I've said before, if you were to be able to dig down in that wilderness along that route, you would see a lot of bodies, a lot of graves in that place. And why? Why did they die? Because of unbelief. They let their hearts be full of unbelief. They chose to, instead of conquering Canaan, they let fear conquer them. There's a passage we can look at. Look at Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. Go to Numbers 13 and go down to verses 28. 13 and 28. This is the report. And they told him and said, We came into the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. See that? What did Caleb want to do? Exactly. Let's go. Well, I'm ready. You're going to take care of business, right? But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report. They deliberately said, Hey, we can't do this. Now, if you remember correctly, who was leading them by day and by night? Who was providing their food every day? Who was providing them water, shelter, protection? God. All of a sudden, though, hey, we can't do this. So this generation, due to their doubt and their unbelief, is completely done away with when they come back to this place. Even Moses now has died, and they're parked in Shittim for a while, right? They've been there at least 30 days, we know, because remember they mourned for Moses 30 days. Now, here back in our text in chapter 3, we see they're going to get up and move to Jordan. Now, one thing we want to see here is that Joshua knew that the Jordan was in its flood stage. You know, they always had a flood at a certain time. They knew it. There weren't any bridges. There weren't any tunnels. There weren't any there weren't any type of equipment to get across. Now, you think about it. How many people did they have with them? Whole gob of them, right? All right. Now, it's not just warriors either, though. You know, warriors strong, they could probably swim across, no problem. But they got warriors, they got civilians, they got children, mothers, they've got elderly, they've got animals, they've got their wagons full of possessions, their household stuff. So it's a large procession. Think about it. All the stuff they had left Egypt with now, and now they're headed over there. And if you look and say, wow, how are we going to get across that? But think about it. Joshua rose up early in the morning. I want you to see that phrase back in our text. Back in Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. And Joshua rose up early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan. All right, so what we see here is that Joshua, remember, had warned them that in 3 days' time that they would be heading out. Told them to get their bread and their victuals ready. Be prepared, they're going to move out. So Joshua gets up early. He looks forward to this. He's anxious to get her done. He wants to go in and begin to conquer and take over. So here we see how the Holy Spirit records this. He says, Joshua rose up early in the morning. So the Holy Spirit is taking notes here. It takes notice of this. And I want you to hold your finger here and go over to chapter 6 and verse 12. Look what it says. And Joshua did what? All right. Now go over to chapter 7 and verse 16. Chapter 7 and verse 16. So Joshua rose up early in the morning. Then one more. Look at chapter 8 and look down to verse 20. No, wait a minute, that's not it. Chapter 8, verse, let me get it here. I've broke down my thing wrong here. I've got chapter 10. Yep, there it is. And Joshua rose up early when? What's that tell you about Joshua? He's an early riser. He's not dreading the task. He's not afraid of the task. He's looking forward to doing what God will do for them. So Joshua early rising proves that he wasn't slothful. He wasn't one who was going to be slack about his work. His heart was in his work. And one thing we as Christians need to have is our heart in the work of Christ. And then we find out here that he's also a type here of Jesus. And you stop and look over in the New Testament, you'll see how Jesus always rose up early in the morning to get apart and pray. You can look at Mark, or you can write these down. Mark 1:35 and Luke 4:42, where Jesus got up early in the morning and went apart to pray. So in this case, he's a type of Jesus, getting up early and getting things done. So they begin to move from Shittim, and Joshua proves that he's not afraid of the task before him, but rather he wants to get her done. The Lord also rewarded his diligence by helping the people be inclined to listen to him. Now you think about this. Remember that last generation, what did they always do to Moses? Right. Bicker, grumble, complain, try to mutiny, rebel against them, all of those things they experienced under Moses. And Joshua was right there watching all this. But here we see God gives them a cooperative heart, a willing heart to do the work. And notice it says everybody got up and everybody moved to the Jordan. So you think about that. The Lord gave Joshua a blessing he gave him a reward of inclining the people's hearts to cooperate with him rather than to rebel against him. And that was no small grace, by the way. Having seen Moses' journey, comparing it to Joshua's, these people were lined up and ready to go there in the morning. Joshua got up early, and everybody was up early too, evidently, because they moved over to the Jordan. They didn't waste time. They didn't hold back or change their mind. They laid hold of the promise of God. Over in chapter 1, let's go back to chapter 1, verse 11. God made a promise. Or Joshua gave the promise here that God said, "Pass through the host and command the people, saying, Prepare you victuals, for within 3 days ye shall" what? So that's a promise, ain't it? Ye shall. Not if you can, you're going to go across, or if it's not flooded, we'll go ahead and try it. None of that stuff. Ye shall pass over Jordan. So they're trusting in that promise that comes directly from God. They're trusting and they're looking to that and holding on to that. Now imagine this whole big bunch of people coming up, and all of a sudden they see Jordan. And Jordan is in flood stage. All right, look at chapter 3 and verse 20. Let's see, let me find my place here. Verse 15. Chapter 3, verse 15 says, "And they that bare the ark were coming to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bare the ark were dipped in the brim of the water." Now look at this catch here. It says, "For Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest." In other words, the annual flood. All right? So here now is a flood. And you got all these people behind you, and they come up to this impossible thing to do. Here's where God's providence arranges things. He humbles us and has us to see, not deny that it's going to be hard, but he has us to face the problem head on. They come to it. The river's in flood stage. So this was to impress Israel of its own lack of ability. Show them they couldn't do it by themselves. Now, sure, some of them could have swum across, no doubt. Some of the stronger ones could have swum across. But what about the rest of the crew? They all couldn't swim. How many of you can swim? Think about it. So, they all couldn't swim. The children obviously wouldn't be able to swim. The animals, some of them could swim, some of them couldn't. Just depends. But it's in flood stage, which means the water's not slow either. Okay, it's rapid moving water. Now we've seen rapid moving water around here when that flood was around, didn't we? Boy, and we've had it several times. We've seen that old Tuckasegee there get up to the bottom of the bridges there in Brassen. I've seen it several times. And they had to shut them down one time because it rained so much that it started breaking gas tanks off of people that live by the river. And those gas tanks were floating down the river, and then they shut down the bridges because if they'd have hit and sparked, it'd have blown that bridge right up. Imagine 50, 100, 150-pound gas tanks going down the river, getting ready to boom. So I've seen that river in high places. And that would be like us getting the whole crew of the family lined up and ready to go across, and we see that river and say, we're not able to do it, but we're trusting in the promise of God. We're going to go across. So think about that. It takes faith and it takes obedience and continual trust in the Lord to go across this river. All right? So if it's in flood stage, that means it's going to be difficult for them unless God intervenes. But if God said they're going to go across, guess what's going to happen? It's just like the first time when the spies went out. They saw that it was a land of milk and honey, but then they gave the evil report. But here this time, they've got a good report from the two spies. Let's go get her done. And then they got the promise from God, says, you're going to pass over. It's just a matter of them seeing how God is going to deliver them across the other side. So this, God brings them through His providence to this learning that they are not sufficient in themselves to do this, but they can trust and rely on God to do it. A lot of us have different talents and capabilities, don't we? A lot of us can do different things. There are some things that teach us we can't do everything. And we need to learn from that and say, look, if God's wanting me to do this, I'm going to trust in Him to find a way to help me to do it. That's faith. That's obedience. All right? So it's to impress Israel of their insufficiency, to humble them, and to show them that they don't have the resources it's going to take to get across. They couldn't build a bridge because it's already in flood stage. They couldn't do that. So they had to depend upon the Lord. And that's where things get done. We looked at the faith chapter this morning, Hebrews chapter 11. All those men trusted in God to get the things done they needed to do. And what happened? God rewarded them for their faithfulness and got her done. So people live a life of faith and trust in God. The obstacle is not the difficulty. The difficulty is in us laying aside our fear and trusting in God for Him to meet the needs. So recall now again that it's not just an army, but it's an army of all kinds of different people, ages, all kinds of equipment. Remember, they even had the tabernacle equipment before they got across. They had the tabernacle stuff all together. So they had to carry all of that furniture too. Can you imagine carrying, remember this piece right here, it's covered in gold, and this is solid gold. These two cherubim are solid gold. Everything on this box is coated with gold. The staves are coated with gold. So think about how heavy that thing would be. And then this too. This was all coated in gold. This incense altar, the golden altar, it's all covered in gold. This brass candlestick, the table of showbread, the brass laver, and the brass altar, not laver, and then the brass laver. All of those things would be extremely heavy. Now, if you're going to cross the river, what goes underneath the river? Mud. It's like, have you ever been in a pond? You get down in a pond and it seems okay when you're on the edge. You get down in there and it starts sucking your boots off from the mud. It's being so thick. You ever seen that? Well, I was baptized in, I think it was Leafus down in Mississippi, and I took my shoes down in there, and I was walking, everything is fine, and I tried to get out and pulled my foot up, and my shoe disappeared. So it's a good way to lose your shoes, in the mud. But remember now, we have a precedent already. We have a precedent where they went across the Red Sea, which was twice as big as this Jordan River. They went across the sea, across dry land, without a speck of mud on them. Dry land. You think they've already got a precedent, and that's probably what Joshua and the elders were reminding them of is, hey, if God could do it to the sea, don't you think He can do it for the river too? And that has to remind us that we couldn't do it. We couldn't get the water to stop. We could build a dam, and by the time we built that dam and had it all dried up below, it would have been a couple years, huh? That's not what God wanted. God says they're going over in 3 days. They're going over in 3 days. So our inability proves and provides opportunity for the Lord to show His power, His omnipotence, His knowledge, and His abilities. Think about this. If God can dry a sea, He can dry a river. He has the ability to cause the elements to serve Him. Remember when Jesus was asleep in the boat? The disciples came down and said, how come you sleeping? We're dying here. We're going to die. We're going to perish in the storm. And what did He do? He got up, went up topside, said 3 words. Instantly the storm was gone, huh? God knows how to work the natural things for us. They might seem impossible for us, but God makes them possible. He wants to show us His power, His omnipotence. He wants to show us to trust in the eye of faith and not in the physical eye. I'm reminded of Peter. It gives us a good illustration of that. When Jesus came walking across the water, remember? Peter was in the boat. They'd been rowing all night. They were scared. They were worried about sinking. Here comes Jesus walking on the water, and they're all nervous and say, "Ooh, what's he doing out there?" Peter says, "Lord, if that's you, bid me come." And what did the Lord say? Come. So Peter actually got out of the boat, trusting in the Lord, and he was walking on water just fine, wasn't he? So this is the same scenario here. Joshua sees this water, but that's not the problem. He's ready to go across, and he's just waiting on God and how God wants him to proceed before he proceeds. That's why he stops here at the Jordan. So God reveals to him the plan here in this chapter, how they're going to do it. And I read part of it to you there just a minute ago. When the arks carried by the priest go, their feet touch the water. Whoosh, there it goes again. Another clear demonstration of the glory and power of God over nature and over men. So as we look at this chapter, read ahead and read these things about how the Lord is going to magnify Joshua. He's going to lift him up and prove that he is a leader from him, that he is God's man, and he's chosen him, and he's going to give him the honor that he deserves for this position. And you think about that, remember in the first chapter, he was reminded several times to be of good courage. Be strong and of good courage. Right? We have to be strong and of good courage when we face the adversary or when we face that river we have to cross. We have to be strong and willing to do whatever God would have us to do. Then when God says do it, you can just go on and do it. It's something to see all throughout the Bible, those things that God has arranged providentially. And when they happen, boy, it's just on a cross. So rely upon God. Trust in God. Be anxious for the work of God. Rise up early and get her done. If the Holy Spirit's moving you to do something, go do it, whatever that is. Whatever that witness is, whatever that testimony is, or whatever work it is that He wants you to do, get her done. And you'll see God moving in many different ways to accomplish His will in those things. Providence in action. We see that all through our lives. We see God's providence bringing us along through this life. God's providence aligning things to keep us on the right path and going towards Him. Joshua's on the right path. Now all the ones behind him are on the right path now. And they're getting ready to cross. So here, now let's see what God's going to do in this chapter. All right, we'll stop there. Let's all stand.